Okay, here's the hut I was talking about. This emphasizes how small some of these huts were. Now this hut racking back of me would have been exactly like it would have been back then. A lot of the huts that you see on the encampment tour as you first come into the park, they're for officers. They're way too big. Now this hut is probably the dimensions that Washington stated when he wanted the huts. They were very small. They were like 4 feet by 6 feet by 9 feet. This hut right here is probably one of the most historically accurate in the park. It's a little high. I think that it would have been a little bit shorter, and the roof wouldn't have been slates or any type of wood. They would have thrown all kinds of sticks and branches, leaves and burlap over top of this hut and back of me. Now, if you look at the hut and the side of it, you know, Continental soldiers back then, the average height was about 5'6" or 5'5". I'm 6'1". I'd probably take up the whole length of the cabin. Now, I would say about maybe 6 to 8 men stayed in this hut. Now, it's a little high. If it had a foundation that was dug, it would probably come up another 5 feet or 4 feet. Now, these were definitely engineered to a specific They were very specific. They wanted them a certain length. And also with the huts, they wanted them in ranks and file. They would have been lined up, officers up front, enlisted men in the middle, and then the baggage in the back. This was generally done even with tents at the time. When Washington encamped his army in different locations, there was a specific order that had to be done with an encampment. He had to make sure his tents were in a certain order, because if anything were to happen, the troops had to be stationed to come out of their tents or their huts in formation. They had to come out in line, and if they had all the Continentals, all the tents were in a line, they were easily awakened, and they could come out and form a line instantly. That's why the line was designed, or the encampment was designed in a specific order. Now, huts like this, the mud and mortar would have been brought from the Schuylkill River. They would have had wagons here. Now, I don't know how many wagons they would have had, but I'm sure that they used their wagons heavily around here. They probably borrowed wagons from farmers, because they had to generally go out in the area, and they had to collect river mud and clay to put between the slats or put between the logs. Now, as the spring approached, huts like this had to be modified because of the clean air, as they called it. They thought that the springtime brought a renewal. It brought clean things to the area. Basically, with the air now a little bit warmer, and they're not trying to keep the cold out, they knocked a lot of this mortar out that was in between these logs. And also, Washington had orders to cut windows in each one of the huts to allow ventilation in, to basically clean the bad air out. This was done here. There was a window cut on either side. Most likely there's probably a window in the back. I think there's a chimney back there, but there'll be 2 windows cut into these cabins. Now, when you think about sleeping in a cabin and going camping, it wasn't like that. These men had to sleep on a bed that was basically straw or whatever they can find. Now, they show that there's bunks in here. They would have made bunks out of sticks. They would have wound them together. They would have been slats across the bed, but their bedding usually was something that in the area, most likely leaves in a bag, or it would have been hay or something to that extent. So basically, it was like a stable. It was a stable for men. Now, these people they had to come out of their cabins. They couldn't just stay here. They had to come out. They had to do guard duty. They had to be with von Steuben if they were teaching. They had to do drill. So basically, even though it was cold and when the spring came, they were, like I said, they were extremely busy here. There was a lot of intelligence coming into this area about the British, how they were in Philadelphia. There wasn't very much movement on the British end either. Now, they were staying in places that were heated by Franklin stoves. They were in places that had a lot of liquor and beer. They were staying in taverns in Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia during 1777 would have been different people. There would have been a lot of loyalists there. There would have been rebels there. I think that the loyalists, the British loyalists, outnumbered the Americans in Philadelphia. There was people that cheered as Howe came in and came down Chestnut and Market streets. There was a lot of people that were for the Americans. They really couldn't do much. They didn't want to be on either side. They didn't want to be known by their neighbors as a rebel or a loyalist. So in Philadelphia, Howe encamped. He probably just enjoyed himself. He had a lot of intelligence. He knew Washington was local. He knew Washington was here. Now, during this time, the Americans were depleted. There was a lot of artillery. They had restocked over at Reading. They fought a battle over at Germantown, and then they retreated to, like I said, this position. But it was very difficult. If the British came into this camp, if they wanted to make a wintertime raid or start a battle, they could have knocked Washington off here. He didn't have the men were sick. There was probably most likely about 9,000 to 11,000 individuals here, possibly more. There could have been 20,000 people here. Now you had people that followed the army. There was people that, women, a lot of the soldiers had wives that followed the army. They did a lot of their cooking and cleaning. Now, like I was saying before, if the British came into this camp, there'd be a problem. They would definitely, they weren't ready to fight at that time. The army was very into shambles. They were raggly-taggly guys. I mean, they had to get supplies. Now, Congress, Washington wrote many times to Congress and said, look, we need uniforms, we need money, we need provisions. But nothing ever seemed to came to the army. It was just that, Washington and Nathaniel Greene had to look after their own army. So basically, there would be different men. Some of them even went as far as New Jersey to go get provisions and come back in this area. Now, this was easier said than done. But basically, Howe was in Philadelphia, so they didn't really have to worry about bumping into the British Army if they went out on these provisional, not raids. They actually, I think they, a lot of the locals gave different things to the Continentals. Like I was saying before, they were given a lot of flour and molasses, and they didn't get their rations. But during this time, like I said, there was a lot of people that deserted also. A lot of the sick were taken out of camp, and some people just deserted. They wanted to go home. It was cold. They missed their families. They might have had wives that were giving birth. They wanted to see their sons, their daughters. So a lot of these men left. They deserted. They deserted Washington's army. But the dead fast Continentals stayed. These guys were tough. They were far from home. A lot of these guys were from Maine. They were from Pennsylvania in this area. They were Jersey, Maryland. These guys were far from home, and this is the only home they knew at the time was Valley Forge. They stuck by Washington. Now there's an account of when Washington was in this area. He was by himself on his horse. Now, there was a gentleman that saw him from a distance. Now, the most iconic thing about Valley Forge is Washington gets off his white horse, and he wasn't very a religious man, Washington was. He wasn't religious. He got off, and the person that saw him said he was praying for the soldiers. He got down on one knee, and he prayed for the soldiers at Valley Forge. Now, this might be a true story, but there's many paintings of it that exist today in Valley Forge. Now, the Marquis de Lafayette, he had his birthday here. He was 20 years old. He was quite an intelligent man. He stayed with Washington. He was like Washington's son. He was very intelligent. But I just wanted to point out that this is a hut that's more historic than any other hut in Valley Forge, and this would have been the specifications ordered by Washington on Christmas Day, 1777.